For months, it has been on everybody's lips, the chikungunya virus. There are a lot of myths and speculation surrounding the virus. However, one thing is certain, everybody has been affected or impacted by the virus in Jamaica. Good evening and welcome to Jamaica News Network's live coverage of the Medical Association of Jamaica's Public Forum on CHIKV and Ebola and its impact on Jamaica's health and economy, being held right here at the Courtly Auditorium in Kingston. I'm Lefine Wigan. Among the topics for discussion at this evening's forum are CHIKV and its projection over the next year, community preparedness, its role in the control of an Ebola outbreak, the Ministry of Health's response to health threats, local and abroad, and finally, the impact of CHIKV and Ebola on Jamaica's economy.
And now to bring us a welcome and the opening remarks will be the President of the Medical Association of Jamaica, Dr. Shane Alexis.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. On behalf of the members and the executive of the Medical Association of Jamaica, along with our partners, Scotiabank, the Gleaner, Fraser Fontaine and Kong, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, the Jamaica Pegasus, the RJR Communication Group and Columbus Business Solutions, AV Concepts, we would like to thank you all for coming. We know what the agenda is, but tonight we want to underscore not just to the persons here, but to everyone across the island and outside the island, just how committed we are to fighting CHIKV, Ebola, and other infectious diseases. Tonight, it's good to see so many people come out about health. We've worked very hard as a team to ensure that we're able to deliver quality presentations, not just with the presenters, but also with the compact discs that many of you have, and we have more to come. The objective is for you to share the information that you receive tonight, not just on hard copy, but also on the CDs with persons who could not be here. Persons in your schools, your business places, your homes, your neighborhoods, right across the island, because tonight you'll see that the efforts that are going to be required are not only going to be tremendous, but are going to be will need everyone to be a part of it. I'd like to thank our moderator for changing her usual habits and coming out to assist us to direct proceedings so that we meet the objectives of tonight. The objective is not just to have a turnout, but to achieve improved preparedness across sectors to ensure that we remain Ebola free. In the event that we don't, that we'll be prepared to control and contain it effectively with the minimum loss of life. So I look forward to our presenters and the discussions to follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexis. And once again, thank you so much to our listeners on RJR 94 FM for being with us, as well as our viewers on JNN. Now, the auditorium here at the Courtly, filling up fast, soon be standing room only. So let me ask you in the audience, show of hands, how many people had CHIKV or what appeared to be CHIKV? And almost everybody puts up their hand. How many people, again, show of hands, had to take some time off from work? And again, almost everybody puts up their hand. And of course, we all know that there are many self-employed people who either felt they couldn't afford to take time off from work or went and suffered through that working experience. Well, Dennis Chung, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, is going to put that in context for us. He's going to be taking a look at the impact of these kinds of diseases on the economy. Mr. Dennis Chung, I'm promoting him here, or perhaps making him an honorary member of the MAJ. Dennis Chung.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dion. After the trip to Cuba with all doctors, I feel like I'm a doctor also, so I'm fine with that. Let me recognize Dr. Shane Alexis. Thank you, moderator. Recognize you. Dr. Mung, Chris Zaka, president of the PSOJ. O'Neill Grant, I see O'Neill Grant here. Brigadier Rocky Mead, deputy of the JDF. And I saw David Wan from Jeff. And ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I want to, if my slides can come up here, I want to look at the impact of the chickpea and Ebola on the economy. And I had a PowerPoint presentation that's supposed to be up, but like all good Jamaica College old boys, right? O'Neill were always prepared, right? Can't say that for Campion, right, Chris? So I wanted to look at the global economic impact of I don't know how this thing works. Maybe someone can figure it out for me. I wanted to look at the global economic impact of Ebola and chickpea, and how does the health epidemic affect economies? Because it's very important for us to understand that, because whilst we talk about the effects of the disease on people and how many deaths and all of that, there's a significant impact on the economy that we're not discussing, and we have to discuss that. I mean, everyone individually might be thinking about the pain that the chickpea has caused. Thankfully, I haven't got it to that extent yet. So I'm still within the minority of about 1%, right? That hasn't caught it yet. I want to also look at the potential economic impact of chickpea as we've seen it. I did some rough estimates on it, and I think it's pretty significant. And I think that we should start examining that. One of the difficulties I think that we've had as a country is that we don't have enough in terms of statistics and measurements out there to help people with planning and to look at impacts. I also want to look at the potential economic impact of Ebola and understand clearly that the impact of a disease like that on Jamaica is much different than it would be on like the US, for example. So there's a lot of debate happening about what steps we should take. We're a different situation than the US, and I'll discuss why. And then what needs to be done, I think, to mitigate some of these challenges. Now, first, let me start with this. This is a map of international air travel. So you see all those green lines, those are the daily flights that occur every day. So when somebody thinks that West Africa is far away from the rest of the globe, then you can see the impact of that. These flights are happening every single day, 365, and I was saying to someone, 365 and a quarter days every year, right? That we're seeing this. You see the greatest concentration in North America and Europe, and particularly London. So it's a significant impact if it's not controlled, and it's something we need to bear in mind, that this thing, even though it's thousands of miles away, it really is at your doorsteps every single day because of global travel. The World Bank report looked at the economic impact of the 2014 Ebola epidemic and the short and medium term estimates for West Africa. And this World Bank report is at October 7th, 2014. Liberia, the GDP impact on Liberia is 3.4% of GDP. That's significant, 3.4%, considering that we have not grown that at 3.4% still since maybe the 1980s, right, Chris? Right, so 3.4% is like 3 years of growth for us. Sierra Leone is 3.3%, and Guinea 2.1% of GDP. Those are some significant numbers that we need to bear in mind. The fiscal impact of that, and bear in mind that we actually have a fiscal situation that we're trying to manage, is US 113 million in the case of Liberia, or 5.1% of GDP. And these estimates are over 18 months, sorry. Sierra Leone is US $95 million, or 2.1% of GDP. That's the impact of the 2014 Ebola epidemic. And Guinea, US 120 million, or 1.8% of GDP. And these are just best estimates, right? And bear in mind that this could vary depending on how the crisis is treated. The WHO estimates, for example, that if we don't start seeing a reversal in terms of infection rates, that it starts going down, we could be seeing between 5,000 and 10,000 new cases per week. So that's significant. So these numbers can actually go up based on that. Other considerations from the World Bank report: if the epidemic spreads to neighboring large economies, the cumulative impact could reach $33 billion by the end of 2015. That's 15 months from now, which is 2.5 times the economies of all 3 countries, if it's not controlled by the end of next year, which is a stone's throw away. The estimates also, bearing this in mind, do not consider the longer-term impact from mortality, failure to treat other health conditions, because once you're dealing with a situation like this, your resources are diverted and the other health issues are ignored. So there's an impact from that. There's the productivity loss and the costs. School closings and dropouts and other productivity impacts. In fact, one of the effects of this virus on West Africa is going to be that they're going to be short of labor force soon if they don't deal with this situation. Think about also the social effects of children who have to grow up without parents. Those are some serious considerations that we need to look at. So the possible economic impact of health epidemics, let us assume that it's contained in West Africa, right? And what the possible impact is on these economies. We're looking at trade deficits, right? We'll get aid to come to these countries, but what that will do is really just a drop in the bucket based on the impact on the trade situation. So we're going to have trade deficits there. And remember that we're just, since 2008, coming out of a financial crisis. So a lot of these economies have not recovered fully. We're going to have travel going down to West Africa, right? So that's also going to hit on their trade numbers. They will receive millions of dollars in US aid, I think, but it's going to be insufficient to make up for the GDP decline that they're going to face. Long-term productivity impact at a fiscal and GDP level, you're going to have a significant humanitarian crisis, and quite possibly what it could do is push those economies into recession. Right? That's a large likelihood. Let's say that it's not contained on the right side. Then what you're going to see is you're not going to really see much difference from what's happening in West Africa, but what's going to be on is on a global scale, right? So you're going to see international trade reduced, certainly. You're going to see international travel reduced, which that's a significant industry. US billions of dollars, I think, will be spent in aid and recovery efforts. So that's going to be diverting funds from productive use to just deal with this situation. There's going to be a long-term global productivity impact. Again, a human crisis, which what you'll find is that you'll have mass migration to areas where people, illegal migration to areas where people feel they can get the best treatment. So the US, for example, is very concerned about migration issues if this situation is not contained. Obviously, capital markets will stall or decline, and you could also see a recessionary impact. Remember, we're just recovering from the financial situation in 2008. All right, let me just quickly look then at what I think that the potential CHICV economic impact was on Jamaica. I estimated that the GDP impact is about $6.6 billion in terms of lost man hours, or 0.51% of GDP, or about 12.7 million man hours of potential loss. And how I got to that number is I assume that, I mean, you saw how many people here were affected, right? And how many people were off of work. I assume that about 50% of the workforce is affected, which I think is low, right? Because it's more like 60 or 70%. Assume a 7-hour work day, and that's conservative because a lot of people actually do work a lot of hours beyond 7 hours. And assume a GDP hourly rate of 520 Jamaican dollars, right? Now, if you were to take that number and let's assume that you have a 30% coverage because people in the workplace will cover for lost man hours, it comes out to about 6.6 billion Jamaican dollars in terms of impact. This doesn't affect, this doesn't speak to the other productivity loss issues that comes out of it. This is just direct productivity impact. So it can be significant. And therefore, you know, as we look at the last quarter numbers, GDP numbers sometime next year, we're going to be looking at this to see what the estimate is. As I said earlier, you know, things like this, I think, should be coming out of the Statistical Institute, for example, so that people are aware of what's happening even before it happens, you know, so we can start assessing impact. It does not consider healthcare cost impact and the effect on the balance of payments and individual spending power. Because if people are home, if people are not working, as Dion said earlier, there are a lot of self-employed people out there who don't have the cover. You know, when they're out, then there's nobody to cover for them. If the income level is not there, then the economy is going to take a blow, right? So I estimate we're talking about 0.5% of GDP possible impact from that. Let's go then to Ebola, because this is a more severe impact than CHIKV. I mean, CHIKV is like a baby compared to this. The cost of preparation and cost of dealing with one patient alone is significant. Is Shane here? Where's Shane? But the doctors can testify that just to deal with one person is millions of dollars, right? In terms of mobilization and care and everything. So it's pretty significant. The cost of tracking the persons, for example, in Nigeria, if you look at Nigeria's case, they estimate that the cost of tracking 900 people as a result of the 20 cases was about US $10 million. Just to track those 9 people, right? 900 people is US $10 million. I mean, if you could divide that 900 into 10 million and give me the average of that as my as compensation, that would be good, right? Yeah, but that's what it costs. So can you imagine a situation like that occurring here? You know, that we have a few cases, a few hundred people that we need to track. And remember, in a situation like, I don't know what Nigeria is like, but let's assume that we have a situation where it goes into one of those inner city areas where about 100 people live down the lane, right? So, you know, consider that in terms of the social impact. The potential impact includes GDP and fiscal impact could be quite severe. And this is where we differ from other economies, like, you know, the more developed economies, is that we rely heavily on tourism. It's our major foreign exchange earner. And you just imagine that you hear that there's a case in a small island. Would you be going there on vacation? And that's the sort of thing that we need to consider. There'll be a significant balance of payments impact and decreased productivity. And also, any negative effect on the U.S. would affect Jamaica. And this is why it's so important that the U.S., you saw the travel map earlier, actually control that situation. The biggest market for us in terms of international travel, for example, is New York. right? So you realize how concerned we are. In fact, I was on the Cuban delegation. While we were there, we heard about the situation in New York, and Shane can tell you the doctors were panicking because they know of the interchange that happens between New York and Jamaica. The minister is here. Welcome, Minister. Happy to see you. So if you assume, we're assuming at the low end here, right, that there's a 2.5% of GDP impact on Jamaica. That's 32.5 billion Jamaican dollars. That's significant, a 2.5% GDP impact. Fiscal revenues from that, if you look at the average, will be impacted by approximately $8.5 billion negative. And then in addition to all of that, you'll be talking about the direct cost to track and treat any case, which will run into millions of dollars for an individual case and could run up to billions of dollars. Fiscal targets and economic program, which we're doing so well in, would be threatened, would have social challenges, spending power and local businesses would be impacted, and of course health and other sectors resources diverted from the normal activities. So we're not talking about a lightweight situation here. It's significant, and what that would do is that it would affect our current and future economic and social situation. There'll be consequences. If you look at Liberia, for example, I was reading an article the other day, they're saying that they don't know when this country will recover from an economic point of view in terms of that impact. So therefore, how do we minimize this? Because I think that is where we really need to get to. And certainly there are some lessons learned. I'll just go to the last thing there from the trip to Cuba. I know that the Ministry of Health and the JDF is actually mobilizing around this. And the best option for us as a small island state that depends heavily on tourism is to ensure that we have strong border controls. That's the best option. That's the first thing we want to do. So therefore, you know, when people talk about the fact that, you know, we have to consider, you know, how people feel if they're being quarantined. I think we are a small island, you know, and we have to make sure that our borders are well protected. I know the Brigadier is dealing with that effectively, right, Brigadier? That's one of your priorities. But we have to ensure that the world has to ensure that the thing is contained in West Africa, right? Because the international travel that I showed you earlier could have a significant impact. There needs to be central effective management and accountability. I think this is one thing you were very gung-ho on, Chris, that there needs to be a central spot where we operate from. We saw that situation in Cuba, Minister, where the Ministry of Health was like a military operation dealing with this thing. In fact, they had about 6 men just watching the TV screens to see what was happening internationally and reporting back. So it was just like an information center. There needs to be effective PR and communication, right? Which means that we have to really be very effective about that. We had a stumble. It was a test run with Chick-V, right, on that, and we're ramping that up. I see that there are some ads running now on radio about the Ebola and Chick-V, and that's good. We need to ramp up the PR and communication even more. And very importantly, I know one of the things that the JDF is in charge of doing is a rapid response, looking at logistics, Brigadier. Yeah, that is something that's put in place. All of this is being put in place, even though it's not here and we don't expect that it will be here. But just in case it's here, then all of that will be done. And also, finally, we want to ensure that the Ministry of Health and whatever central management place is going to be has adequate resources to deal with it. Because the cost, the opportunity cost of not doing that is much more than the cost of doing it. and doing it properly. So in concluding then, as I said, border control and prevention is a preferred least cost from a social and economic point of view for a small, vulnerable, and tourist-dependent country like Jamaica. One of the things I know that the minister that is working on and had approached his Cuban counterpart about is a regional approach, because which makes a lot of sense, because you know, everyone thinks that if something is in one country in the Caribbean, it affects the whole Caribbean. So that's one of the things we need to look at in terms of coordination. Any introduction of Ebola would have significant direct fiscal and economic costs, and any incorrect handling even more significant costs, especially on our tourism product, which is our #1 foreign exchange earner. I don't consider remittance an earner, right? It's a gift. The trip to Cuba showed us that our present structure right now is not as yet ready, but I know that we're putting in place structures, but that it needs certain characteristics. We need to have central management and executive powers, something I know Chris was very gung-ho on. There needs to be a rapid response team, and that needs to be very effective. I see that there is some concern about that came up at the press conference today about the Chest Hospital being used as an isolation unit. But as Professor Davison dealt with it earlier today, we've had even more infectious diseases being dealt with there, and there was no problem. You know, the tuberculosis, for example. So there's no concern there. I think the important thing, what we learned from that trip, is that there needs to be a central point to manage this situation where all your resources can be concentrated to minimize the risk. Everything needs to be done to ensure that it never arrives. It's like insurance. You don't want to use it, but you have it. So we need to do everything in our power to ensure that it just does not get here, which means that at our border controls, we need to deploy the most effective resources and most talented resources there, because that really is the most vulnerable spot. And very importantly, and finally, I'd say personal responsibility and transparency is critical for prevention, which is why the MAJ is having this forum to ensure that people are properly educated and that we know what our personal responsibility is. And I just want to say on that even with this management of CHICV, it comes down to personal responsibility. If everyone ensures that they clean up their surroundings, we'll have maybe half of the 70% having it. Right? But you've had it already, so you can't have it again, right? Until, as Dr. Alexis says, another strain comes. So, thank you.
And thank you so very much, Dennis Chung. And let me just remind all of you that following the presenters, then we'll be having the question and answer session. So I do invite you to make jot-ins, hold your questions until then, and then we can go into our question and answer session with a vengeance. Well, after what I would call a very sobering presentation, I think Dennis Chung's presentation leads very naturally, in fact, into the issue of preparedness and to what is, in fact, being done, what are the plans. And I usually say to my listeners and my viewers that we have 3 topics in Jamaica: politics, economy, and crime. And those go round and round and round. But this year, that obviously has been turned on its head with a vengeance. And the health minister has been one of the most sought-after ministers for interviews in 2014. Dr. Fenton Ferguson is here as the Minister of Health, and he is going to be addressing us now on actions being taken by the government. And I know for him, your pens are ready as you jot down those questions. Dr. Fenton Ferguson. I just want to, while he comes, just remind you that we are live on JNN and on RGR 94 FM.
Madam Moderator, fellow presenters, distinguished members of the medical fraternity, business sector, citizens all. Let me first of all apologize for being late. Today, it's been a very hectic one. We had a press briefing, then I had to go to St. Thomas for the handing over of a significant piece of equipment for the Princess Margaret Hospital, back to Parliament where I was supposed to be making a statement. Our opposition spokesperson came late, so we had to, in the latter part, had to put off making that statement. But I'm very sorry not to have been here at the start. But I spent a few days with Dennis and a number of others in Cuba. And so we had the opportunity to discuss the issues and looking at the challenges and also the opportunities. I want to congratulate the MAJ together with the sponsors for really putting on this most important forum. I believe it will do us well listening to the many speakers, and it shows the proactive nature, and I must congratulate President and his team for this wonderful forum with so many persons here and out in Radio Land and elsewhere. Jamaica has over the years established a national surveillance mechanism which involves actively seeking out new and re-emerging infectious diseases, as well as passive surveillance, which includes reporting illnesses to the regional health authorities and the Ministry of Health by private physician, hospitals, and clinics designated as sentinel sites. This network was designed with the assistance of the Pan American Health Organization and CARIC, which is now the Caribbean Public Health Agency, in keeping with the World Health Organization standards utilized right across the world. This is the same system we used to detect influenza A, H1N1, malaria, when we had an outbreak some years ago. To diagnose, screen, and to do contact tracing for tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS tracking, measles, polio, among others, and it has served us well. Jamaica was able to track and eliminate malaria, detect the introduction of and manage cases of H1N1, and detect the introduction of CHIKV, as well as identify local spread at the country level. We have a strong history of public health which continues to serve us today. Outbreak response mechanism and CHIKV. Response to any outbreak follows a similar format. In the case of CHIKV, the Ministry of Health established a National Emergency Operations Center for coordination of the response. We also worked with the regions and parishes to establish local EOCs to be able to quickly do significant case finding and tracking, as well as identify contacts in the early stages. A part of our involved vector control activities, which were ongoing. The Ministry of Health on its own is not in a position to control mosquito breeding, so the call for support from other government agencies and members of the public with respect to vector control was where we tried to emphasize. The vector that spreads CHIKV and dengue, the Aedes aegypti mosquito, lives primarily in and around the home. The recent drought resulted in significant water storage and a rise in Aedes indices, leading to a greater number of circulating vectors. When the CHIKV organism was introduced through regional travel, the Ministry of Health was in a position to respond quickly. We had a developed plan which included surveillance, medical management, and communication. We must admit that the reach and extent of the communication program was inadequate. With the recognition of this and the injection of support by agencies, we later were able to scale up our communication response, and today we would have reached a more significant portion of the population. We always had adequate supplies of Panadol and moved to extend opening hours in some of our health centers once we recognized that facilities needed to do so for treatment of affected persons. We'll continue to work with support of the population to maintain the vector at a low level, but we continue to emphasize the need for personal responsibility to destroy mosquito breeding sites and protect oneself from mosquito bites. We have learned some critical lessons. We are enhancing our communication response and ensuring that the lessons are applied to the Ebola response. We'll continue to work with all our stakeholders. We appreciate any assistance that can enhance our response. I'll now speak to some of the actions taken with respect to Ebola, since the Honorable Prime Minister instructed that the response and the preparation be raised to a national level activity with the involvement of a number of stakeholders. The Ministry of Health, in leading the process and in working very closely with the Jamaica Defense Force, which is a part of the joint coordinating team. And I'm happy to see Brigadier with us this evening. The roadmap for Jamaica's integrated Ebola response. As a result of these discussions, we have drafted a roadmap for the country's integrated Ebola response, and we are now in the process of working with all stakeholders to fine-tune the details. The roadmap is three-pronged and include 1, border security plan, 2, health management strategy, 3, public education. An Ebola control center is also to be set up at the JDF. We have been working very closely with the team from the JDF and have had several discussions about how we are moving forward. And let me just make it very clear, ladies and gentlemen, when we say that we are setting up an Ebola control center at the JDF, it does not mean that we are handing over the responsibility of the Ministry of Health. What it means is that we are taking from all the critical stakeholders the best that they can provide. And for those of us who have had the opportunity to visit the JDF Control Center, they have a fantastic system there. Our epidemiologists and others will join them in the response relative to the analysis of data, even as it is now. Their staff, even before the national level response, they were tracking CHIKV and Ebola. And what we saw in Cuba further, and Brigadier was a part of that delegation, further convinced us that together, working in this particular situation, we'll be able to get best results. In terms of public education, we are moving to strengthen the responsible department within the Ministry of Health. The JDF is providing some support in this area, and I've asked the Medical Association of Jamaica and the Jamaica Medical Doctors Association to assist with the public education. This evening is a good example. With the funds now available, we have begun implementation of the comprehensive Ebola communication plan. You may have seen the ads in the newspaper, on television and radio this past weekend. Regional training of trainers and stakeholders, sensitization is being conducted, and community education packages are being developed for distribution. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jeffter Ford for voluntarily setting up that exhibition last weekend in relation to Ebola preparedness. And we really want to say to him, from all reports, that it was well received, and the ministry will also be working with him in ensuring that as we expand such an exhibition, we be able to move it right across the country. Border security. In terms of border security, we have been strengthening surveillance at all our points of entry. The private sector has been very responsive to our call for partnership. And I'm very happy to see the president of the PSOJ with us this afternoon. Last week, Sagicor made a donation towards the purchase of a thermal sensing unit for the Sangster International Airport. Supreme Ventures Limited yesterday handed over a check for the purchase of a similar unit for Falmouth cruise ship complex, along with handheld thermal sensing machines and Ebola kits. We have had other donations of handheld thermal sensors, and will now be getting a total of 41 units. 6 were donated by the husband of the Prime Minister, Most Honorable Errol Miller. 25 are to come from Supreme Ventures Limited, and 10 from Friends of Eastern St. Thomas. We recognize that while we concentrate on the official points of entry, we also have unofficial entry points in various communities, including our fishing villages. To this end, I've had discussions with the Minister of Agriculture, Derek Kellier, and State Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture, Luther Buchanan, who has the responsibility for fisheries. Minister Buchanan will be listening with the Ministry of Health and the regional health authorities to begin a program of sensitization with fisher folks. Minister Buchanan, as you know, was previously assigned to health, and so I believe he will bring tremendous value to this area. I note that as part of our border protection initiatives, the government recently issued a travel ban against certain persons traveling directly or indirectly from or through Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone in light of the outbreak of Ebola in those countries. The ban extends to persons ordinarily resident in these 3 countries, Commonwealth citizens who are not citizens of Jamaica, and CARICOM nationals despite the free movement regime. Jamaican citizens and residents who have traveled to these areas within 28 days of arrival to Jamaica will be quarantined in the interest of public health and national security upon their arrival in Jamaica. I am in full support of this decision by the Ministry of National Security. Assistance from Cuba. A few weeks ago, Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller made a call to the President of Cuba, Raul Castro, to see how that country could assist Jamaica in its response. Cuba has always partnered with us in the area of health, and we have existing human resource and other agreements with Cuba. Cuba has also been assisting the Ebola response in West Africa with 256 collaborators slated to be there, and some have arrived already. And the country is known to have strong systems in place where healthcare is concerned. It is against this background that I led a delegation to Cuba to seek technical support with respect to Jamaica's Ebola management and response. The team included Deputy Chief of Defense Staff of the JDF, Brigadier Rocky Meade, who's here this afternoon, Captain Debbie Newham of the JDF, Head of the School of Public Health, UTEC, Professor Winty Davidson, President of the Medical Association of Jamaica, Shane Alexis, President of the Jamaica Medical Doctors Association, Dr. Alfred Dawes, CEO, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Dennis Strong, Public Health Nurse and NAJ Representative, Delia Thomas, Director Health Services Planning and Integration, Dr. Lundy Richards, Director Strategic Human Resource Management, Benjamin Wasom, Chief Nursing Officer, Marva Lawson Byfield, and a representative of the opposition, Jamaica Labour Party, was invited. Former Health Minister Rudyard Spencer was slated to join the team but was unable to attend. Agreements with Cuba. Ladies and gentlemen, Cuba has agreed to the following. President Castro suggested that we visit the Pedro Curie Institute of Tropical Medicine when he spoke with the Prime Minister, which is the agency through which all Ebola activities in the country are managed. After a tour of the facility and later discussions, the Minister of Health for Cuba, on my request, agreed to set up a memorandum of understanding between the IPK, which is the Tropical Institute, and broad-based technical institutions with the government of Jamaica and involving the National Commission on Science and Technology, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, and academic institutions, including the University of the West Indies, the University of Technology, Northern Caribbean University. We will seek to include all other critical institutions in this process. Secondly, Cuba will assist with the training of healthcare and other frontline workers in Ebola preparedness. 2 experts will be sent to the island next week to train our workers as well as those Cubans presently deployed to Jamaica. Cuba will provide training for the 30 healthcare workers who are slated to arrive in Jamaica in November, prior to their arrival as part of the current HR agreement, and has also undertaken to train those Cuban health workers who are already in Jamaica. Fourth, Cuba will share information with Jamaica daily on the progress of Ebola response in West Africa through its control center to keep us updated on the epidemiological situation and other important information required for decision making. And when we say sharing information, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about every day at 11 their time would be 10 our time. The minister and his team, deputy ministers, are briefed for 1 hour on the situation in West Africa. And in that response, they have agreed that Jamaica will be privileged to, at 10 o'clock our time, be in on those discussions. And they are live because they are in touch with their collaborators who are in the countries. They are in touch with things as it unfolds. They are in touch with what is happening in the United States. They are in touch with what is happening in Spain. And so it is a live, up-to-date, and they are allowing us to move into that system, which will also allow us to make better informed decisions. You would note that almost daily, some of the protocol, WHO, CDC, is changing. And so we want to be there. We want to know what is happening. 5, Cuba has agreed to deploy doctors and nurses to assist in the response in the event that Jamaica experiences any outbreak of Ebola. We are still awaiting a formal response to the request for Cuba to provide additional personal protective equipment and contact tracing kits for managing potentially exposed persons in community. 7, in terms of chikungunya and dengue, I asked Minister Morales and the Cuban ambassador to share any best practice response to vector control, specifically dengue fever and chikungunya. As a result of those discussions, an expert will also very soon be coming to assist Jamaica to improve our response in this area. 8, at the invitation of the minister, Jamaica will be sending a delegation. In fact, the delegation left this morning of experts from countries belonging to the ALBA group, and they will be having a meeting on Wednesday and Thursday, 29th and 30th. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Marian Bullock-Lucas, is leading a 3-member delegation to Cuba for this conference. It will further strengthen our position, and when she returns on Friday, I am sure Jamaica will be better for it. Sensitization of staff and staff motivation. I've instructed the Director of Strategic Human Resource Management in my ministry to go on a program to meet with and motivate our staff in light of the present situation with CHIKV as well as the threat of Ebola. I know that all of this is taking a toll on our health workers. I want to assure them that we are doing everything in our power to protect their health, especially where Ebola is concerned. Training of health workers and frontline workers. In addition to the training the 2 Cuban experts will offer, we have been conducting training sessions and have so far sensitized close to 750 healthcare workers and other frontline staff, including security guards, janitors, and porters. Personnel from the Jamaica Defense Force, Jamaica Constabulary Force, the Fire Department, Immigration and Customs have also been a part of the training and sensitization activities. We have engaged the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, the Fire Brigade, and the JDF to begin the process of organizing simulation exercises to ensure that our workers know what to expect at all levels. Regional response to Ebola. I've been advocating for a regional response to Ebola through CARICOM. I believe that this will enhance each country's preparedness and response. As we have seen with CHIKV, malaria, and cholera, if one country in the region is affected, we are all at risk. Ebola is a deadly disease, and as we have done at the country level, we have to ensure that we have all hands on deck at the level of the region. Our strength will be dependent on our ability to unite for this important effort. With this in mind, I made a special appeal to Cuba on behalf of CARICOM for assistance to launch a regional response to Ebola. Minister Morales has agreed to facilitate this request on behalf of the Cuban government. The Ministry of Health will continue to lead the process, and we have been steadily making progress with our preparations for Ebola. We'll continue to work with our partners, including the Jamaica Defense Force, which has been very involved in working with us to put systems in place towards creating an effective and efficient response mechanism in all phases. Again, I would like to thank all persons, including the private sector, the citizens who have assisted in some way, no matter how small. We consider every bit of help to be valuable. As we continue our Ebola preparedness and response activity, I urge everyone, including my colleague, members of Parliament, to continue to assist the Ministry of Health to protect you, your family, your community, and our country from Ebola. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. And if you are listening on RJR 94 FM, I'd just like to let you know that you are listening to live coverage, a special edition of Beyond the Headlines. We're broadcasting live from the Courtley Auditorium in New Kingston. We are broadcasting the Medical Association of Jamaica Public Forum dealing with public health issues, CHIC-V, as well as Ebola, and as well acknowledging our viewers on JNN. We are also broadcasting live on JNN. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the work of Keneal Thomas, who members of the audience would see over to my right. He is a sign language interpreter for the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, as we attempt to ensure that this extremely valuable information gets out to all Jamaicans, regardless of status. Now, you know, earlier this year, we heard about this disease that was making its way throughout the Caribbean. That was at the point where we were still trying to phonetically spell out gun-YAH, and saying it very slowly to ensure we didn't trip over ourselves. That was before the word morphed into chicken gonorrhea and chicken gunman, and for those people who can't bother, the chicken something. And one of the things, though, is to note the kind of similarities in the issues and the concerns and the discussions that have been held across the region, as our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean have also been affected by CHIC-V in particular. So thanks to the wonders of technology, we are now going to be hearing and seeing Dr. James Hospitalis, who is the head of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, who is going to be giving us a little bit of a regional perspective on this CHIC-V issue and what we can expect to see going forward.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Hearing you loud and clear, Dr. Hospitalis. Please do go right ahead.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon or good evening to colleagues in Jamaica, Honorable Minister Fenton Ferguson, who was the chairman of our board last year, Professor Reed, other colleagues. I am to speak to you on chikungunya and its projections over the next year. Before doing so, I think it's worth reflecting that both chikungunya and the threat of Ebola represent emerging infectious diseases that are always with us on this planet, and the need for national and regional health security. I heard Minister Ferguson describe the measures being taken in Jamaica, and including the call for a regional response. I can share that with the CARICOM Secretariat, we are preparing for a summit of CARICOM heads of government, the theme of which will be stopping Ebola there and here, because we need to work to contain it at source. That's the only way that we will be secure in our part of the world. But let me go on with the chikungunya discussion. I am asked to talk about chikungunya in the Caribbean projections over the next year. And I can summarize the point in 3 words. It is likely to become endemic in our countries. That is to say, like dengue, it will be with us for years to come. And there is a lot more pain and misery associated with this one than dengue. This is a giant among the arboviruses. Dengue might kill you a little bit more frequently, but this causes a lot more pain, as you will see from my presentation. This is the outline of my talk. I'll speak a little bit about the global spread, the epidemiology, and the role of our agency, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and then reflect on the projections over the next year, in part looking at what happened in the island of La Réunion in the Indian Ocean. Then I'll spend a good bit of time talking about the transition from the acute to the chronic phase of the response and the features of the chronic phase, conclude with the economic impact and the way forward. I listened with interest earlier to Mr. Chung's description of the likely economic impact. Well, we are the most tourism-dependent region in the world, and we have 50 million arrivals per year in the Caribbean, approximately a half by air and a half by our cruise ships. So we know our health in the Caribbean is affected by the health of others. Globalization has really highlighted that interconnectedness. We know that communicable diseases travel faster and further. What's in Liberia or Sierra Leone can be with us in 24 hours. Much media attention has been focused on this, especially the US. I actually think they've overhyped it too much. If you look at how the British press cover it, it doesn't generate as much fear as the US media. But it's a genuinely serious disease, unlikely to come here, but one which would have catastrophic impact, so we must strengthen both our national and regional capabilities. The international health regulations too also playing here. If you look for this period, 1954, around the time some of us were born, to 2004, there were about 1 million cases in the world. Because in looking ahead, you've got to look back. And it was mostly in East Africa, to some extent in India, and in Indonesia. If you jump now from 2005 to 2013, you see spread further into Southern Europe, you see spread in China. And when I took office last year at CARFA, the thought occurred to me, my God, it's just a matter of time before it would come to us. And indeed, that's what happened. If you look at the epidemic of scientific publications, you see that coincident with the spread into Southern Europe, there's suddenly a big increase in scientific publications on chikungunya. What has happened to us in the Caribbean then? In December of last year, the first cases were reported from St. Martin, and with a totally susceptible population, both young and old, and widespread mosquito vectors, we predicted that transmission would be swift and widespread. And indeed, that's what has happened. As of September the 27th, we have chikungunya in all of the OECS and in 23 of the 24 CARFA member states. Total number of cases confirmed is 15,000, with 2,400 of these in our CARFA member states. Estimated total, about 750,000. The deaths so far have been 152, and the long-term impact, which I'll spend time on, is what concerns us most of all. Now, we also know that the numbers of cases on the ground greatly exceed what's being reported. That's called the iceberg of disease, where what is known to the ministry or to CARFA in terms of laboratory confirmed cases is much smaller than the true burden. And I'll show a bit more on that in a minute. So if you look across the region from where it started in St. Martin, everywhere now is affected. And the epidemic overall in the Caribbean is still on the upswing. We have not yet peaked. So some countries like Dominica or St. Martin, which started in January, have now passed their peak and they're seeing fewer cases. This is the epidemic curve of cumulative cases of chikungunya, and you may think it's peaking, but this reports, there's a lag in reporting, as well as a large number of cases on the ground just never get reported. If you have the idea of an iceberg for the acute epidemic, you have 1/10 of it in the laboratory confirmed piece on the top. And then you have a lot of people with clinical symptoms who just stay at home. They take some time off work, they get some medicine from the drugstore. Then you have people who are mild or subclinical, and a smaller number who are asymptomatic. Chikungunya, about 75% of people who get it have symptoms. The opposite for dengue, where 75% of people who have dengue have little or no symptoms. If we look at the projections then for the next year, while the number of cases reported to CARFA and PAHO have leveled off, there are countries that have failed to report. We don't really know what will happen exactly because of this number. And nevertheless, given the difficulties that we have in controlling the vector, it's anticipated that the number of cases will continue into the present year and into next year. If we look at La Reunion, which is an island of about 800,000 people, that may give us some idea. And we see that 30% of the population was affected. So 30% of 800,000, that's about 250,000 people were ill. And if you look at Jamaica with 2.7 million people, you can do the arithmetic. Now, after that big epidemic, there were very few confirmed cases until a cluster in 2009. And if the epidemic in La Reunion can be used as an example, then we might expect after next year that the numbers of cases go down. And you may think, it's over, but it's not. An advertisement here about CARFA. This is some of the stuff that we do at the regional level to coordinate the regional response with a multidisciplinary team and partnering with PAHO. We do the confirmatory testing for member states. We partner Caribbean Airlines and LIAT transfer the specimens for testing to our BSL-3 facility here. We've had field responses to several countries, and we have a convening role. We will be having a special conference on chikungunya at the end of November, and then a public-private forum. The response to date for this year really has been an emergency response with relatively low numbers of cases, and we need to be moving from that to looking at 2015 and beyond to a more individualized care approach. I want to spend quite a bit of time now on the chronic pain issue. Most people with chikungunya recover in 1 to 2 weeks, but a percentage develop chronic joint pains. Those most likely to develop joint pains are older than 45, they're female, and they may have pre-existing osteoarthritis. Current WHO guidelines suggest the use of non-steroidals like ibuprofen or naproxen for treating the pain. They're pretty interchangeable, the NSAIDs. And you may need to use stronger class 2 or class 3 painkillers. In one study in La Reunion, 75% of people who had chronic pain had a moderate or a good response to normal analgesics, and 25% had a poor response. The pain is of two kinds. There's joint pain, a so-called nociceptive pain, and nerve pain or neuropathic pain. And that it seems harder to treat. Really, we need more research to understand better who are the people at risk and what happens when you have pre-existing conditions like sickle cell disease. And this is an urgent need for this kind of research. Here are some points on the general care in the chronic phase, providing information on the disease, symptomatic treatments, NSAIDs, and sometimes you may need to use stronger NSAIDs, identify any neuropathic element, and so on. You see the list of issues to consider here. I've already touched on this, that the virus invades the lining of the joints and sometimes the nerves, and then the subsequent immune response causes an inflammation, which can be hard to manage. The other thing is that it gets you down. If you have chronic pain, you will be more likely to get depressed, and your ability to function at home and in the workplace can be impacted. Now, the next several slides I credit to a French colleague from a conference on chikungunya that we just attended. And some viruses have long-term consequences, like West Nile, which has an encephalopathy. Dengue can produce a chronic fatigue syndrome. And some viruses, like chikungunya, can produce a chronic rheumatism. So chikungunya is both an arbovirus that's transmitted by mosquitoes and can have an epidemic spread, and an alpha virus with this chronic rheumatic type of dimensions to it, and it's often underestimated. The exciting part is what's happening now, and everybody's talking about it and calling for the government to resign because they're not spraying, but in fact, that's not what solves the problem, as Minister said. People have to take responsibility for their own homes. The less exciting but more painful part is ahead of us. Some of the various rheumatological symptoms are shown here, and you see persisting inflammatory arthralgias, tenosynovitis, and arthritis of the thumb. Actually, my wife is in the middle of it, and her wrists and hands, she's having great difficulty to do anything. If you look at the psychological consequences, here's a study of the military in La Reunion, and a third had complete disability, almost a half had some significant disability, and 1 in 6 or 15% moderate. 5% became depressed, a third are demoralized, and almost a half with significant fatigue. So this is what might be the bigger problem that we face ahead of us. In the subacute phase, you have to provide information on the disease, and the fact that you have this relapse also gives rise to another misconception. People say, but CARFA, ministry, you all said we can only get this thing once, but I had it last month and I'm having it again. In fact, what you're having is a relapse as the immune system kicks in and starts to tackle the virus in the joints. And I have a sister who had it 1 month ago, and just today she's saying it's all come back. So if we ask for a show of hands in Trinidad, you get the same sort of, a lot of people are putting up their hands. Evolving towards a chronic condition, we see that at 3 months, the majority of people still have some pain. 15 months later, a half, and 2.5 years later, a bit under a half of people have pain. Some of the way this works in the lining of the joints is shown here with post-chikungunya polyarthritis. And these are various studies. This may be hard to read, but from India and La Reunion and Sri Lanka and Italy and Japan, looking at the percentage of people who 12 months, 17 months, 24 months later had persistent arthralgia. Arthralgia at 6 months later, 700 policemen in La Reunion. You see the chart here showing 86% had some chronic arthralgia and pain and morning stiffness. Stiffness of the joints at month 6 in the same study of policemen, 600 policemen. Chronic impact on the mood. People who have been positive for chikungunya compared to those who were not. 10-15% of people 6 to 12 months out still feeling a bit down. And increased health-seeking behavior. People who were chikungunya positive increased frequency of consultations with their GP and with specialists. So if you think that a half of the adult population is going to be attacked by this over the next 12 to 18 months, it's going to have a significant impact on increased health services load. Quality of life, same policeman study, you see that the red inner line shows their quality of life was a bit lowered. So the post-chikungunya chronic inflammatory rheumatism, then this is what we're becoming more concerned about as the epidemic progresses in the Caribbean. I've already shown these. Here's an account from a patient, and I think we're all hearing these stories that people have been, I've never had anything like this before in my life. I couldn't move, I couldn't even turn over in bed. But here's now one that comes to the social consequences. This was from La Reunion. I lost money because I was a self-employed person. I had to pay all the bills related to my medical checkups. And then Social Security takes a long time. They didn't believe. And so there's an additional administrative person in this person's life to get the coverage that they needed. In many of the countries in the Caribbean, we are seeing enhanced NIS payouts because of short-term absenteeism. So this is the acute outbreak in La Reunion, very dramatic in 2006, arbovirus epidemic. But this may be the real impact of medical care and disability and a longer-term financial impact that persists for 3, 4, 5 years afterwards. And this is the alpha virus, which becomes then endemic in the population. This slide so the arboviral stage, we're focusing on controlling the epidemic and trying to get ahead of Aedes aegypti. We're now trying out some new participatory surveillance systems where people can text in their symptoms. And BVI and St. Vincent are doing this and trying to short-circuit the time it takes to get vector control to the communities that are affected. Sri Lanka has a program like that. And then on the right, you see now the alpha virus phase, where managing the patient, the full cure is what becomes the dominant issue that we face. So this, as I said earlier, is a giant among the arboviruses. It's a global challenge. It's different from dengue. Patients need much longer term follow-up in the health services. Here are some references for the audio. I think then I will close there with the projections, therefore, for chikungunya over the next year is for it to go on to peak and then become endemic, occurring year on year, and more occurrence of this painful arthralgia in the population with some mental health impacts. I'm afraid I don't have very good news for you, therefore it's end up where I started to say we can expect endemicity, greater pain and misery in our population. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hospitalis. You know, I heard the reaction that went up from the auditorium when Dr. Hospitalis spoke of 2 years on, 6 months on, then 2 years on, and the ongoing pain that many people can testify, in fact, they have already been experiencing. So, well, they say knowledge is power, so now we know, now we're prepared. I want to acknowledge as well those listeners and viewers on gojamaica.com, and I do want to let our friends who are following along on the internet, as well as those who are listening on radio, those who are watching TV, know that we are going to try to get in some of your questions, if possible, during our question and answer session. One of the easiest ways to get that in, you can send me a tweet at DJ Milo JA. You can also tweet JNN as well, and we'll try and get in at least a couple of those. All right. Now, we are also going to get a perspective from the Pan American Health Organization, because as you would have heard from the various presentations, the role of community is very, very critical in this issue of preparedness and response. And we're welcoming now Dr. Cam Mong, who is going to be talking to us about community preparedness.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Fenton Ferguson, Minister of Health, Dr. Alexis, President of the MAJ, Mr. Chung, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a pleasure to be here, and we do thank the organizers for giving us the chance to talk a little about Ebola. And what we have been asked to do is to talk about the success stories on Ebola, especially with regards to community participation. While waiting for the presentation to come up, very quickly, the sequence in which I will be presenting. First, very briefly, 1 minute on what is Ebola. Second, salient facts that all of us need to know. Number 3, the history. Number 4, what is the current status both in West Africa and around the world. And very much more so, a little more time on success stories. There are 2 countries that have success stories, Senegal and Nigeria. And want to share with you all that on the 17th of October, WHO presented a consolidated checklist for Ebola virus disease preparedness, a very comprehensive one. And I would like to focus within that checklist on public awareness and community engagement, and end off by a take-home message. What is Ebola? It's a viral disease, and formerly was known as Ebola hemorrhagic fever. It is a severe, often fatal illness, and the case fatality rate, which is the number of deaths over the number of cases, can go as high as 90%. It means as much as 90 out of 100 patients can die. It is one of the world's most virulent diseases, but very important to know that it is transmitted only, and I repeat only, by direct contact of infected animals or people with, number 1, blood, number 2, body fluids, and number 3, tissues. Salient facts. The outbreak currently happening in West Africa is unprecedented in scale and also in geographic reach. It is now even worse so, and the danger is the potential to spread, which we all know. Currently, there is a doubling of cases every month, meaning in 1 month's time, the number of cases would have doubled. And it varies between the countries, between the 3 countries, Guinea-Conakry, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, from 2 weeks to 1 month. Unlike previous outbreaks, this outbreak is happening also in cities and urban slums. And the capacity of the country's health systems to deal with it is crucial in how the disease can be contained, or it will take longer. The World Health Organization announced on 17th of October that Senegal is free of Ebola, and on the 20th of October that Nigeria is free of Ebola. The history. It is a 38-year-old disease. It first appeared in 1976 in 2 simultaneous outbreaks. One in a village near the Ebola River, that's where the name comes from, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and the other one simultaneously in a remote area of Sudan, both in Africa. The origin of the virus is unknown, but fruit bats are considered the likely host of the Ebola virus. This is based on available evidence. From 1976 up till 2012, there have been 23 outbreaks in 7 countries. These are in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Gabon, in South Sudan, Ivory Coast, Uganda, Republic of the Congo, this is different from DRC, this is Congo-Brazzaville, and in South Africa, which was an imported case. Unfortunately, the presentation is not coming on. I love maps. And the next one is a map which shows very clearly where it is. It's impossible for me to explain, but it shows very clearly which other countries. Good. This is the map I'm talking about. You can see this is Africa. The southern side, South Africa, and you can see in the middle, I don't have a laser pointer here, so it's difficult to point, the Central African countries in the middle, and the current outbreak is in West Africa. Then you see the next, Nigeria is also part of West Africa, Nigeria is in the middle. This is data as of the 25th of October 2014. There have been a total of 10,141 EVD, which is Ebola virus diseases, in 8 affected countries since the outbreak began. This is more than 6 months ago when the outbreak began, with 4,922 deaths. And you can see the variations between and among the countries. The most affected is Liberia, with more than 4,600 cases and more than 2,700 deaths, followed closely by Sierra Leone, with more than 3,800 cases and 1,200 deaths, and followed by Guinea. This Guinea is Guinea-Conakry. There are 3 Guineas. Guinea-Conakry is French-speaking, Guinea-Bissau is Portuguese-speaking, and Equatorial Guinea is Spanish-speaking in Africa. This is the map, which is showing the current status as of the 25th of October, and the yellow circles show the number of cases. The bigger ones are from 101 cases to 215 cases and so on. So you can see the distribution of the cases there. The concern is from relatively small West African countries, namely Guinea-Conakry, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, to spread into the larger countries, larger neighbors. And like I mentioned, Senegal and Nigeria is now free. So there is a success story, which is that Ebola can be contained. And that success story and the lessons learned and the experiences can help countries, number one, that are worried by the prospect of an imported Ebola case, which all countries are, and eager to improve their preparedness plans. Want to go right into the success story. This is a quote by the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Margaret Chan. If a country like Nigeria, hampered by serious security problems, and we all know the Boko Haram threat and other security threats, can do this means make significant progress towards interrupting polio transmission, eradicate guinea worm disease, which they did this year, and contain Ebola, all at the same time. Any country in the world experiencing an imported case can hold onward transmission to just a handful of cases. This is a very powerful comment. I worked in Nigeria from 1991 to 93. It's a very big country. When I was there, the population was 120 million, and it is a big, big country. This is the index case. We'll go more into detail into this later on. Landed in Nigeria at the Murtala Muhammad Airport, and then Lagos has a lot of slums, so that is a particular concern for the disease. What the country very quickly did was they used the healthcare systems and the methods that were developed to combat poliomyelitis, and they were quickly turned to use in fighting Ebola. Strict measures such as guaranteeing the ill and monitoring the context, which is a key point in the containment, was done immediately. A national emergency was declared, schools were closed, and very, very, very important, which the minister just mentioned, all resources were channeled through a single body. And that was the EOC, the Emergency Operating Center for Ebola. And that leads to better coordination. This really is ultra important. The index case, as all of us know, index case is the case that started. A gentleman from Liberia traveled by air and arrived Lagos International Airport on 20th of July. He died 5 days later. He was vomiting during the flight, at the arrival lounge, and during transportation with a private car to a private hospital. The protocol officer who escorted him, later he died of Ebola. At the hospital, he told the staff that he had malaria, and he denied contact with an Ebola patient, which was not the truth. Later, it was confirmed that his sister had a confirmed case of Ebola and died in Liberia. The traveler visited his sister in hospital, he attended the traditional funeral and the burial ceremony. No staff at the hospital took precaution because he said he had malaria. 9 doctors and nurses, meaning 9 healthcare workers, became infected, and 4 of them died. The lesson from this, beyond the fact, is that one has to be very careful not to take at face value whatever one has been told. It was a painful experience. The second outbreak site is in Port Harcourt. It's an oil place, a very big city again. A close friend of the index case flew to Port Harcourt to seek care from a private physician. This was on the 1st of August. On the 10th of August, the doctor developed symptoms, and he passed away on the 23rd of August. The lab test confirmed the city means Port Harcourt, first case on the 27th of August. It's a big city, so the number of high-risk, very high-risk exposures are very alarming. In a sense, all ingredients for an explosion of new cases was in place. However, the explosion of cases never happened. Why? Because all the resources required were immediately mobilized to stop the outbreak. We just heard what Mr. Chung said, the Nigerian government used to contain, it is big money. Just very quickly, the data as of now, Nigeria has a total of 19 confirmed cases, 7 died. It shows a case fatality rate of 40%, which is lower than that of other countries, which comes anywhere from 70 to maybe a little lower. Again, the reason is because resources were immediately mobilized to stop the outbreak. Contact tracing. The minister mentioned about the contact tracing. Our country, Jamaica, other countries have a lot of experience and successful eradication programs because of the experience and the success of contact tracing. What it means is that anyone who had been in contact with the index case, this is the Liberian gentleman, either directly or indirectly, were traced. Number 1, they were traced. Number 2, they were monitored, each and every one. And then if they were showing signs of illness, they were isolated. Important. The process was through personal interviews and use of mobile telephone data in real time. Important to note the real time because there can be no delay in that. And the use of communicators. The next one will show what we mean by communicators. Each contact, anyone that came into contact with the index case is called a contact, was assigned a communicator. The communicator conduct daily health checks. And if the contact became sick, was immediately taken to an isolation ward. Before that, the isolation wards of the countries, the facilities were upgraded. They were staffed with the healthcare workers and also with volunteers. They have had and still have the proper equipment, meaning all patients receive professional care and treatment. Again, the 23rd of July, the first Ebola case was in Lagos. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country. 1 out of 5 African is a Nigerian. Lagos has 21 million population, 21 million. And it is a little less than the population of Guinea-Conakry, Liberia, and Sierra Leone combined. Contact tracing was done so well that the health officials reached 100% of known contacts in Lagos. It's a sprawling city. Lagos is very big. And 99.8% of contacts in Port Harcourt, which is the second outbreak site. Mobile phones with specially adapted programs, applications, were used to do real-time reporting. This was taken directly out from an application that Nigeria is using for polio contact tracing. All identified contacts were physically monitored on a daily basis and for 21 consecutive days. This is the time of the incubation. There were some who attempted to escape the monitoring system. They were tracked. They were returned to medical observation, and they were made to complete the needed monitoring period of 21 days. We talk about the isolation wards. There are also Ebola treatment facilities and the need for vehicles, which, because of time, I will not go into details. On the 20th of October, the chain of transmission in Nigeria was broken. What does that mean? It means for 42 days, which is twice the number of the maximum incubation period, after the last infectious contact in the country with a confirmed or a probable case. So it means 42 days past. How? This is very important. How was this achieved? This was achieved with strong leadership. The head of state and the Minister of Health were the driving force. There was effective coordination, I just mentioned, through just one single coordination mechanism. The rapid utilization of a national public institution, immediate establishment of an emergency operating center, which we talked about already, first-rate virology laboratory, which was staffed with trained human resources, equipped with the necessary equipment. They very quickly and reliably, important to note, it's not just the quickness, it's also the reliable diagnose capacity of the laboratory to diagnose Ebola. And that made it possible to have containment measures with the shortest delay possible. We talk about high-quality contact tracing. I decided to put it in again just to stress the importance of contact tracing through experienced epidemiologists, to have early detection of cases, rapid movement to an isolation ward if there are signs and symptoms, which diminish the opportunities for further transition. Because of that, the success now, Nigerians again are now comfortable shaking hands. At one time, no, this is a big thing. At one time, they were afraid to do that. As all of us know, the countries, the three most affected countries in West Africa now are concerned about shaking hands or embracing, as we know. However, the country decided to have continued vigilance because it's a very porous border. It has border with Benin, it's border with Chad, you name it, Niger. So all these are very porous. It's a big country. Because, and also by air, by land, and by sea. There's a seaport, many seaports actually. The continued vigilance is necessary because it is sure that more carriers will cross West Africa's porous borders. So what is the government doing? The government officials are controlling the risk through screening. Land borders, seaports, and air borders, all three. Surveillance teams are trained so that they can respond very quickly if new cases pop up anywhere in the country, not just in one. Now they are saying, the government is saying that the healthcare teams now have experience handling the disease. The resources are available, and the case with the first index case made them do an experience which they took it as a practice run. So they are saying even with several new cases, they will meet the challenge. This is a quote from the director of Port Health Service at Lagos Airport. It's a very big airport. Best practices. Strong leadership, I mentioned that already. Generous allocation of government funds, and very quick disbursement. It might be, that is important, quick disbursement. Yeah? The minister mentioned partnership with the private sector. This was crucial in Nigeria because it brought in substantial resources. It also helped scale up the control measures. Communication with the general public. I will go more into detail in that because that is the topic of this presentation. And the president, Goodwill Jonathan, he reassured the population through appearances on nationally televised newscasts. I made in red the ones that I think is very important to take back home. Best practices, sorry, English is not my native tongue, so it's a little difficult. I'm just, best practices at the community. Communities were rallied to support containment measures to contain the spread, house-to-house information campaigns, television, print media, radio, all are good and very powerful, but still not enough. Has to be house to house. When I was working in other parts of the world, even person to person, town criers type of thing, it's important to get the message across. And the messages on the local radio stations, and it's put local dialects. As you all know, Nigeria has more than 100 dialects, so it's very, very difficult to get one message in just one language or in just one dialect to reach the whole population. What are the messages about? It was to explain the level of risk to the community. What are effective personal preventive measures? And what is the government taking as actions for control? The media opportunities were exploited through social media to televise facts about the disease. And facts is important. And well-known Nollywood movie stars, we all know that Nigeria has a thriving movie industry, and the movie stars are very, very, very popular, so they were being used. Important, very important. Traditional, religious, and community leaders were engaged early on. When I was in Nigeria, we were working very hard on guinea worm eradication, and the importance of religious leaders, the imams, especially in the north, was crucial. You think you are going there with all the knowledge and the support, but until and unless you get the okay from the imam of that, or the religious leaders, or the community leaders, nothing will be as efficient as you need to be successful. They played a critical role in sensitizing the public. Again, traditional, religious, and community leaders being engaged early on. Awareness campaigns, very important. What were these awareness campaigns focusing on? They focus to encourage early reporting of symptoms. Means the signs and symptoms were very important as the messages. And what another message is telling the public, that if you have early detection and you have good supportive care, it will decrease the patient's prospect for survival. Mind you, the case fatality rate in very serious case can go as high as 90%. So the survival rate is very important. And this we touched already. Next, please. Again, a clear division of roles and responsibility. In Nigeria, WHO, the country office, the regional office, which is called Africa Regional Office and headquarters from Geneva, they were responsible for outbreak investigation, risk assessment, contact tracing, and clinical care. For the awareness campaigns, which was supported by social mobilization experts, were supported by UNICEF, CDC, and MSF. The government is doing its utmost to maintain the confidence of the citizens and the foreign companies and investors by undertaking screening of all, not just arriving, but also departing passengers by air and sea in the two states affected. Lagos State is where Lagos is, and Port Harcourt is where, River State is where Port Harcourt is located. And the average number of travelers screened each day rose to more than 16,000. High vigilance is being maintained to be made aware that the government is very aware that the country is vulnerable to another imported case, as I mentioned before, because of the huge travel and also the poor border. As long as there is intense transmission in other parts of West Africa, as you saw from the map, is the same area. The surveillance system, which the minister mentioned, is on guard and on high alert. But there's a problem. The problem is because of the country's success in containing and because of the low fatality rate, we showed at 40%, there's a belief that Nigeria has good or even magical treatments to offer. And that really is happening. So the risk is that others from other parts of the Africa and their families will come to Nigeria for first-rate life-saving care. That is a problem that they are encountering now. The government does not stop there. In spite of the success, they are further revising the National Preparedness and Response Plan, and that is from the experience in the two states, Lagos and River State. Next, please. I want to share with you the document I mentioned in my first slide, the document from WHO, which is called the Consolidated Ebola Virus Disease Preparedness Checklist. This came out on 17th of October. It is to help countries to assess and test their level of readiness. It's also to be used as a tool for identifying concrete actions. There are 10 components, and under each component are tasks for the countries and the international community with timelines of 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. It also states the minimal required resources for equipment, materials, and human resources. Also included are key reference documents such as guidelines, standard operating procedure, training manuals. This, before WHO used to send to the countries guidelines on, let's say, patient care or risk communication, or laboratory. This is a consolidated one, so that's why I'm really proud of my organization for bringing this up. The components are overall coordination, rapid response team, public awareness and community engagement. That's what I will talk about. As much as I would like to talk about everything, there's just not enough time to do that. Infection prevention and control, case management at the Ebola treatment centers, then another case management regarding safe burials, epidemiological surveillance, which is so important, contact tracing, laboratory, and capacities at points of entry, which is very relevant for Jamaica. This is a picture of what this is about public awareness and community engagement. In the left-hand column is the component. What this component about is the middle column, and these, allow me to read it. These are efforts to, number one, promote the understanding of at-risk communities on Ebola, and address any stigma hampering Ebola virus disease, emergency health care, and effective surveillance, highlighting the point that the community has a crucial role in the alert. Why is this needed? Why is this important to be in place and ready? Because in some countries, as all of us are aware, health centers have been attacked. People were highly afraid, the population was highly afraid, due to a result of false rumors about the spread of the disease. So to address this head on, this became important. This is also, this is very busy, but I just want to share with you, I have written down in the next slide each component. This is the way it looks. Up is the description, and then the task, and within how many days that task should be finished. The right-hand column is the reference document, and below are the resources needed, be it in terms of human resources, and be it in terms of material, equipment and material, and the linkages to other components for this one, and support to be provided or can be provided by whom. These are the subcomponents: description, task, deadline, resources, equipment, materials, linkages, and reference documents. The description of this component is to reduce anxiety by communicating technically correct messages to targeted population areas. Technically correct, very important. And also to mobilize communities to identify cases by communicating the importance to report suspicious cases rapidly. We need to rely on the communities. These are the tasks. I'll just read, there are 16 tasks. I'll just read the 3.6, which is establish coordination mechanism for engaging with the community, involving traditional leaders, relevant sectors in a bottom-up approach. And this is supposed to be finished once you receive the guideline within 30 days. This is the second half of the task, and I would like to identify the 3.12, which is establish a system for rumor monitoring, investigation, and response. It is very important, very, very, very important. Human resource. It is at 2 levels, and this I just want to spend and actually read all. This is at the national level, the recommendation. 1 social mobilization stroke anthropologist, 1 an expert in media, an expert in community health, public relations expert, four representatives of Journalists Association, health blocker, one from the radio, one from TV, and one from print. One focal person from each of the following ministries: information, education, local government, health, defense, agriculture, and rural development. Of course, the structure here is a little different. In Nigeria, we have all of them. Interior, we have one interior, we have one rural development. One representative of the community, of religious organization, opinion, youth, women, and leaders. I will skip this. There's a subnational level. Equipment and materials, information, education, communication materials, posters, megaphones, car stickers, brochures, leaflets, T-shirts. T-shirts are quite important. And as mentioned before, the mobile phone application and also solar-operated mobile phone. 2 moving cinema vans, local radios, local communication network, messages from churches, mosques. In Nigeria, there's a lot of Muslim community, traditional leaders, schools, farms association. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to go very quickly. Linkages and support provided by various organizations. Next. Key reference documents, there are 5. Next, please. We will make this available because I was just got that, I was just told I already has passed my time. Take home message, yeah? Community preparedness is critical for the control of an Ebola outbreak. This is very important. There are lessons that can be learned from successful stories and reviewed if it can be used in our country. Public awareness and community engagement is critical, and the most important, Ebola can be contained. Thank you.
And thank you so very much, Doctor, for that presentation. Now, we are going to be moving into our question and answer session. I'm going to invite Dr. Ferguson to join the other guests on stage. Just to remind you of our guests, you just heard the presentation made by Dr. Cam Mung from the Pan American Health Organization, Health Minister Dr. Fenton Ferguson, here also coming to the podium. Along with them, Dr. Dennis Chung from the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and we heard via technology from Dr. James Hospitalis, who is the head of the Caribbean Public Health Agency. Just want to acknowledge as well the thousands of Jamaicans who have also been following along via Radio Jamaica, RJR 94 FM and RJR 94 FM if you're just joining as a listener going into a little bit of overtime here on this special edition of Beyond the Headlines. We're also having our viewers live on JNN and in addition gojamaica.com. So thank you all so very much for following along. Now, I'm just going to allow the guests to remain seated, and you can put questions to them. I just want to, I see people lined up about 10 deep at the microphone already. Let me just set a few guidelines, please. I'm going to ask you all. Remember, we're trying to get in as many of your questions as we can in the amount of time we have left. We're also going to be trying to get in some comments from our listeners, our viewers who are following along on the internet. We have a conversation going on Twitter, hashtag JNN Live. So you can participate via that as well, or send me a tweet, DJ Miller JA. I'll try to get to those as well. All right, ground rules, please, I beg you, keep your questions very, very tight. I'm asking you not to make speeches. If you do have a comment to which you'd like a response, please try to keep it very, very tight. And I'm begging you as well, if someone else has already made your point, don't bother make it again. Don't bother reiterate. We don't need it to reiterate. We've heard. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to identify yourself as well as your organization or your affiliation if you so desire. And I'm going to start over on my right. Please go straight ahead. And please say if it is that there is a special guest you would like to have answer your question. Go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Oli Matatal. I'm a journalist, activist, and a publicist. I'm also representing IREFM. I'm from the Gambia, West Africa, and Tuskegee, Alabama. I just took a delegation of about 19 to the Gambia in June. And one of the things I had to fight as we were going was Ebola. And we came back because Ebola is not in Gambia. My questions is 3 questions I want to ask quickly. There's an Ebola-free Gambia campaign going on. I want to know how we can begin an Ebola-free Jamaica campaign here through the school system. I'm working with the universities, working with the colleges, working with the primary schools and the middle schools. I mentioned it briefly to Minister Lisa Hanna.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to speed you up. Second question, and in future, everybody else, 1 question each. I forgot that ground rule.
Okay, the second thing is I feel that we need a strong campaign with the musicians. So I started to put together a rhythm, and we did an Ebola rhythm. So what I want to know is if we can host a meeting kind of like this with the music industry on November 3rd, but we need people to support us, help us find a venue, and perhaps even do it here.
And third?
And the third question is, I didn't really hear the discussion about, one of the speakers said, stopping Ebola in Africa means stopping Ebola in Jamaica. So what I would like to see is us to bring the Nigeria High Commissioner and other Ebola-free Africa campaigns like in Gambia, Senegal, etc., to the table so we can discuss measures and putting together financial resources and sending things to Africa that they need to fight Ebola in Africa, like the Ebola kits, whether it be other financial resources.
All right, got you. I'm so sorry, gonna cut you off because lots of people have questions. All right, Ebola-free campaign in Jamaica through the schools. Dr. Ferguson, you want to take that?
Just quickly to say that I would be very happy to engage the person who asked that question, because we are rolling out a program now which includes Ebola-free, but we are open to any suggestions. We believe also that the entertainers are a very important and critical group that we need to engage. And so if there is a plan afoot to set up, we'd love to be party to those discussions.
Okay. Let me just intersperse that with a question, because as I said, I'm trying to get in the questions here from people who are not actually here. Following this particular response, the JDF representative we have here, we're going to invite to make a very quick comment, but while we're getting the mic to that person, or we're asking him to come up, oh, there's a mic in the audience. Let me just ask this question. What should private laboratories do to enhance Ebola preparedness? Will they be included in the proposed training? That sounds like...
They will be included, but I don't know if Dr. Mong would have anything more specific, but I know they will be included because we don't have, I think it's one lab that is ISO certified presently, and there are others who we can work with.
All right, thank you very much. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that the Jamaica Defence Force is actually doing a lot more than was mentioned before. Two things I wanted to mention to make sure it's understood is that we're actually assisting with capacity building within the Ministry of Health and also assisting in coordinating the other agencies. And I'll give two illustrations. It was mentioned that we have our operations center and that we've been monitoring CHIKV and Ebola from months before, and we had offered to share this information, of course, with the ministry. But we're going further than that. At the request of the ministry, we're going to be helping to build the ministry's own capacity for monitoring. When we went to Cuba, we saw that this facility was contained within the Ministry of Health, and you also saw from the Ebola response that having everything contained in one central facility is the best way. So in addition to sharing our information, we're going to be helping the Ministry of Health to build its own operations center capability. The last one I want to mention in terms of coordinating other agencies, it was mentioned that we are happy to be a part of the emergency response, but indeed we have coordinated for the Jamaica Fire Brigade with a lot more experience in hazardous material handling to actually take the lead on the emergency response. So I just wanted those things as examples to be mentioned so you can see we're doing a lot more to help the ministry build capacity than was mentioned before.
Rocky Mead from the Jamaica Defence Force, thank you so very much. Let me go to the microphone at this side.
Thank you. The name is Christopher Murdoch, and I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Police in charge of the New Kingston area. And I want to raise a concern from the residents, business, and the entertainment community within the New Kingston district as it relates to the occupation of the Shoemaker Gully and the health conditions that exist there. Minister, with the threat of Ebola, I think there is great need for this to be addressed urgently. The living condition and situation that exists there, it is awfully inadequate, and the health risk that is concerned. Now, I did a little Ebola alert and show in terms of the linkage with the group being contracted with the Ebola and the places for which they visit. The entertainment center, you have the fast food restaurants, as also financial institutions. Contact will be difficult to trace if this should affect that area.
Thank you so much, Mr. Murdoch.
The discussions, I'm sure you're making notes, so we'll follow up with you on that matter. Because I know it has to be a joint response. It's not just a ministry response, but it is going to involve the security force too.
Thank you.
And here's a listener, I beg your pardon, a question right up the street, I think, of the health minister, who you all know is a dentist by profession. This question is with respect to dental practitioners who have to come in contact with oral fluids and blood. What kind of measures are going to be taken in our dental clinics?
Well, again, we wouldn't expect in a normal way to see dentists wearing the typical suits. But it is, and I do believe from practice now, we would be wearing gloves and other things. But I think with an Ebola threat, it also means that the mobilization and public education that is presently on all the professions, medical, including dentists, and auxiliaries, because we have dental nurses and assistants. I think all of us have to be part of that public education system and taking the necessary precaution, even in the history that you take before you engage in treatment.
Thank you so much, and we're back to my right.
Okay, I'm Garth Riley from the YMCA, representing and speaking on behalf of Mrs. Sarah Newland-Martin, the General Secretary. And the question is, what is a plan for those persons who are affected by CHIKV living with disabilities?
Thank you very much. For those of our listeners on radio, we're seeing the guests look at each other and trying to figure out perhaps who should take that one.
Well, put it this way. I believe that persons with disability and depending on the kind of disability, under normal circumstances, would require special treatment in terms of how if it could be a blind person, it could be one disabled, physically disabled, and therefore, again, part of the precaution that needs to be taken is within the households. If there is any member of the household who would have CHIKV, we need to ensure that they are protected in the household, because if you are not using repellents, if you are not covering at nights, you also now present a possibility for mosquito to bite that person, infect the person with the disability, and therefore it also involves how we manage. In spite of all the other things that you would do, you have to therefore be extra careful in how you monitor the home, in homes where you have persons. The same I would say for persons with other, what we call comorbidity. Sickle cell, persons with sickle cell who are normally predisposed to pains of the joint, etc. And I'm not putting them in the normal disabled community, but it means, and persons who are in that group, we would see across the globe are those who are most impacted, having had CHIKV. So extra precaution must be taken. But I will also ask my technical team to have a special look at if there are any best practices across the globe that can be made to apply to our local situation above and beyond what I've said.
Let me just follow up on that question if I could, though, because I think especially having heard the presentation as well of Dr. James Hospitalis, I mean, those people who said, yes, they knew they were being affected by this thing called CHIKV, perhaps felt a little bit of a sense of validation. But the complaints we've been hearing, Dr. Ferguson, from people, including those in what are being called the vulnerable groups, is that they go to the public health facilities, which are overwhelmed, and they're not getting any acknowledgement that they deserve to be treated in a special way, seeing that these are the people who are likely to be worst affected and possibly at risk of death. And they are saying they're not seeing that special treatment. They're being told the same thing everybody else is told, take 2 Panadol and go home.
So you're putting on the table that our health facilities need to look at how, give some kind of preference to persons with disability.
I mean, with respect, I would think I wouldn't need to put that on the table.
I'm just saying that you're now saying
I'm following up on Mr. Sarah Newland-Martin's
are not
comment.
responding. So we need to send a reminder out in terms of a clear policy direction, because in a sense,
if it is that someone,
if we believe it ought to happen.
If I could just clarify,
yes.
So you know where I'm going, and I think the members of the audience would hear. If you are a member of the disabled community or a member of what is being called these vulnerable groups, the very young, the elderly, someone with an underlying chronic condition, surely there needs to be a special protocol if you arrive at a public health institution, any institution, and say, I think I have CHIKV. And the concerns we're hearing is that that is not happening, that is not in place. What can you tell us this evening? Because people are dying who have had underlying conditions and who develop CHIKV. Our Jamaicans are dying. People are dying. Yes, we know most people will recover, but given the fact that there is that possibility of death for people in vulnerable groups, what can you tell us to assure us that any of us who fall into those groups or who take our relatives or friends to the hospital who falls into those groups will get the special treatment that they should?
What I can say this evening is that we will review and take the necessary decision that will allow for those special groups to be treated with in keeping with what we would regard as best practice.
Let me go over to this microphone, over to my right, the lady in green, I think it is. No? Oh, red. I do beg your pardon. I'm so short, everybody looks looks tall to me. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sudan Sherland, and I'm a member of the public. My concern is this, right? I've heard, I don't know if it's a rumor or whatever, but I've heard that they found a cure for the Ebola. This is addressing to Mr. Mung. They have found a cure for the Ebola, and it only works on whites alone, not blacks.
Hello? No.
It's on, sir. Go ahead.
Testing.
I heard you. Go ahead, sir.
No, there is no proven cure as of now. Of course, as you know, WHO is working not just on the treatment, but also on the vaccine. But no, there's no treatment. There's no cure.
They're not hearing you. Could you speak into the mic a little bit more, sir?
Yeah. There is no cure. There is no. That is not true. What you just said.
To cut a long story short, let's get a question over here, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just two questions, one for CHIKV and one for Ebola. All right. All right, first things first.
My ground rule number 3, one question per person.
I know, but it's two different things. All right, first thing first, we know that blood donation is a critical part of healthcare in Jamaica. As it relates to CHIKV, what is the impact that it's going to be having on our donor screening and collection? That's the first question. Second question, Mr. Chung alluded to the fact that the impact of Ebola on close, compact, low-income communities would be devastating if basically the index patient managed to cross our borders. We want to know what is the extraction and isolation methodology, what we have in place to extract and isolate an infected person. That's it.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Cook is going to respond to that issue. I just want to let our listeners know that it is our listeners on RJR 94 FM. We want to thank you so much for having been with us on this special extended edition of Beyond the Headlines. We've been coming to you live from the Maj Public Forum at the Courtley Auditorium. And for those of you who are interested in continuing to follow the discussion, we continue live on JNN and on GoJamaica.com. Yes, Doctor.
Thank you. First, if I could just answer the question you asked about the vulnerable groups in the health centers. It has always been the protocol that vulnerable groups get preferences in our health centers and all our health facilities. What we have noticed is that sometimes the officers don't follow the protocol, and so we have fallouts in these situations. What we are going to do, though, yes, there will be sanctions, but what we're going to do is to reiterate the policy of preferences for the vulnerable group. And as we have been saying in the media continuously, if you have any challenges, we have complaint desks right throughout all these facilities that lead that lead directly to the region. In the past, we might have had challenges with them not working, but we are in a place now where they are working. We do read these complaints, so I do encourage the public, please lodge your complaints at the complaints desk, so that will help us with our customer service policy as we develop that. The question about the blood bank. The blood bank has made it public that they have had challenges in terms of blood collection during this period of Chick V. Before this period of Chick V, we had 2 or 3 successful bouts of blood collection. Faye Ellington led one of those blood drives which collected over 150 bags of blood. So we are not at too much of a critical state, but the blood bank continues to encourage people who have not been affected with Chick V to come in and donate blood so that we can maintain our reserves in the event of any eventualities.
Thank you so very much there. And the extraction issue?
Yeah. As far as the extraction goes, in the event of any person being found to have Chick V, as Brigadier Meade has explained, Ebola, as we have explained, we have a specialized team from the fire department that has ideal and perfect hazardous material gear and high levels of training hazardous material management. That team is going to be the designated team to do all extractions of all suspected Ebola victims, to take them to the center for treatment. So there's no need for any, fallout to think that people need to be taking any taxis or taking the bus. Anybody, once you have somebody in your community that is suspected of having Ebola, the Ebola hotline should be called, the hazmat team will be sent in, and the extraction will be done.
Thank you so much, Doctor. All right, I have a question here which actually dovetails with one of mine, so let me go to this. Dr. Fenton Ferguson. Now, I should tell you, almost every night in the newsroom, we get a call from somebody who is absolutely positive that there is a case of Ebola at one or the other public health institutions. This person is saying it's rumored that there is a case at National Chest. Is that true?
No. No, okay. Absolutely not.
However, let's move on to the next part of the question, which, as I said, dovetails with what I want to ask. What is going to be the communication protocol? If it is, God forbid, that there is a case of Ebola in Jamaica, is the public going to be notified immediately? And what is it that you plan in terms of giving information to the public?
Once there is a case, as it was even with Chick V, you must report it to the WHO. So it's not a secret. And once you report it, it is on their website, it is everywhere. So, you know what I mean? It is not for Ebola, it's not something you could hide. It's not in the interest of the country. But we have protocols. You don't want to get the country in a particular state by the way you would say or announce to say it is at a particular hospital. There are some things that you still must maintain, even as you will admit that there is a case within a country. There are protocols that would govern that, and clearly the best persons to do that would be our technical officers in the Ministry of Health, namely the Chief Medical Officer, or in the case of the acting permanent secretary, who is the substantive chief medical officer. So we have persons who would be available in such instance. Can you guarantee that we'll get the news here in Jamaica from our Ministry of Health, not from CNN or CDC? I'm just saying that you will get it from the Ministry of Health, because before we are the ones. We are the ones who would have to report it to WHO or any other place. I'm just trying to get very clear on this, because I get your reporting procedure. Are you, though, having reported it to your international let us not, partners? You see, I am very clear about the media, too, because there are instances, or let us argue. Just before you go off, though, Dr. Ferguson, with respect, just tell us, though, would you be informing the country
immediately, having followed protocol and informed your international partners?
Yes, we would.
That's a yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
please
yes.
continue.
No, but I'm just saying that if there's a person who might have gone into a country and for whatever reason would have lied, and from outside there is some knowledge, the person for whatever reason slips into a country, we would not have any idea in relation to that person's health, because if they are in an incubation period and there's no symptoms when they cross the border, we would not know. Someone from outside could have that knowledge, and therefore if it is let go from that side, we would know. So I'm just making where there could be exception. But I will tell you, in a normal situation, if someone comes in, we are aware the government of Jamaica has the responsibility through my technical staff or myself in what based on advice to tell the country that we are presently in a situation where we have the first case of Ebola.
Which we hope, of course, never happens.
And we expect thereafter that based on the public education, etc., that it will be managed in a way that the country will not go in a frenzy.
Thank you so much.
Because it has to be managed.
Yes, sir. Yes, go ahead.
Good night to each and everyone. And I don't want to elaborate a lot because right now I'm ipping, but it's not really a pick I get. I got a pinch. I'm suffering from pinched nerves right now. But my question is, we don't live near to Africa. And I'm represented in the informal sector, which is the Jamaica Vendors, Eaglers and Market Association as its president.
Yes, sir.
And we are a very important set of people in this country. And when the minister, in terms of meeting from a mayor level, a ministerial level at Jamaican House, we believe that it was wrong in the first instance that you should have borrowed the national arena or the stadium. Put all the important sector of people in one place. No matter what anybody say in this room, we don't have Ebola here right now. And if it's here under the carpet, we don't know until we hear.
Tell me a question, Mr. William.
Our people are traveling into the United States, which is our backyard. Our people are going into Miami. Our people are going into our neighbor to this side, like Panama, Curacao.
Got your point, but tell me your question.
The question I'm asking, we are hearing about all kind of detection, inspection, suspect, and all of this. We are going nowhere.
What's your question? What's the question?
The question is, what are the methods putting in place at our checkoff desks by air, land, and sea outside of our country? We are not talking about hearing that it come here. What methods are put in place at all our checkoff desks where we can prevent more than we are trying to cure?
Got your point. Thank you so much.
Earlier I spoke about what we are doing there are 4 critical areas. Your airports, your seaports, your marinas, and your fishing villages. You would have already heard that in terms of the airports and seaports, we are now in the process, and we have started, of upping the number of persons in terms of port health inspectors, etc. We are now putting in the temperature sensor machines. We have already received funding for 2. I just heard today that there is the possibility of funding for a 3rd. We have the hand sensors. We are now about to have for our ports 41. We had promised 20 initially. All we will be doing at the St. Norman Manley, we are setting up presently an isolation area there. That they are making plans that if a airline come in, there's a suspected case, that case would not even enter into the building because there's a isolation area that is set up as a holding area at the airport. So there are plans. It is a work in progress. It would be impossible to tell you tonight. Yes.
When you're right, I'm speaking from those important countries which our people travel from to Jamaica.
Okay, Mr. Whittingham.
Taking place from that side?
All right. Hold on, gentlemen.
Fairness, Mr. Dunstan, you would believe that while Jamaica is making its pitch, and there has been the World Health Organization on the 8th of August declared Ebola to be a public health concern of international dimension. All nation states, whether we are in the Caribbean, whether we are in the US or elsewhere, ought to be taking and making plans just as Jamaica is doing. The other thing would be to contain the infection in West Africa in those 3 countries, because it can only get to us by importation. It can't develop in Jamaica naturally. So it has to come from somewhere. But I would like to apologize to you, your group, because I believe that your group is an important group that we have overlooked in the consultation. We have met with several groups, and I would love to speak with you so we can set up to meet with your group.
Changing microphones.
Yes, I'm Dr. Susan Lowe, Private of Online Counseling Jamaica, and I would just like to say to Mr. Chung that if the Americans are going to pour aid in, I would strongly suggest that the Chinese will be doing the same. Moving right along to treatment, I would like to say that I have been using integrative medicine to treat CHIKV, and I have found it very useful using herbals, etc., in preventing the relapsing rate and the degree to which people relapse. So we shouldn't discount our Jamaican herbals and other things. I use regular and normal, and I would just like to know if anyone here could say definitively regarding the sicklers, is it just a matter of ramping up our supportive care of them, or is there any separate protocol for a sickler?
Just checking to see if any of our...
I wouldn't want, you're a medical doctor, this is a forum, I would not want to be the one to give advice in that regards. But certainly, you know that sicklers have specific issues related to joint pains, etc. And to that extent, the CHIKV, which also impacts on joints, and even for those who thereafter might go beyond the normal period. From reports, they have been, in fact, from the reports we have been getting, there are some sicklers and others who are getting serious substernal pain and discomfort outside of the joints. They're also having that kind of pain, which put them at high risk, and therefore it becomes even more sensitive, the management of patients who fall in that category.
All right, the same microphone again.
Rachel Irving University. Dr. Mong, is that your name? What is the World Health Organization doing in getting a cold storage facility for the Caribbean so we can get some of the promising therapeutic and vaccine in case we need it?
The question, Doctor, is are we going to be getting a cold storage facility so that the Caribbean could stock up on vaccines if they're developed?
What PAHO WHO is doing is looking at all the countries within the Americas and seeing where the most effective place to have storage for that type of thing is. For the English-speaking Caribbean, Jamaica is the largest population, and that is one thing that our organization is looking into. To add to that, with regards to Ebola lab testing, because of the virulence of it, the recommendation has to be a BSL-4. Safety level has to be very high, and that is why the recommendation of PAHO WHO is samples to be collected very, very, very carefully, transportation to be done in a way that will not be contagious to others. The protocols are there, standard operating procedures are there, and at this point we are recommending to be sent to two places. One is CDC lab in Atlanta, and the other one is to Canada, the Public Health Laboratory.
All right, I just want to let members of the audience know and our viewers online and on JNN, I think we'll go for about another 10-15 minutes or so and wrap up at 8:30. So we're just trying to get in as many of your questions as possible during that period of time, and we're back to this microphone.
Yes, good evening. My name is Maxine Campbell, and I'd like to find out what is the lifespan of the Ebola virus as it relates to body fluid outside the body. And secondly, as it relates to transportation, public transportation, the JUTC, for example, the sanitization, how is it that it's going to be dealt with? Because as you mentioned that there may be persons for some reason maybe in the country with it and not yet known, and if they should travel by public transportation, should we be proactive or reactive as it relates to sanitization of the public transportation buses as of now, knowing that so many things are happening? Shouldn't it be, yeah.
Okay, got your question, I think. Thank you. So two questions there in terms of the lifespan of the Ebola virus. Doctor?
Yeah, Ebola, first of all, to be very clear, there is very less risk of contracting Ebola because it is not an airborne infection. Unlike H1N1, SARS, influenza, it is only through direct contact with an infected animal or person through the blood, body fluids, and tissues. So the risk is much less. It is a very dangerous disease, but the mode of transmission is much less. The patient can be, one is infectious only when showing signs and symptoms. That is one point that is important, and that is why in the presentation, to know the symptoms is very important. Now, the lifespan of the time that a person is infected usually is about 2 weeks to maybe a little more, and if he or she recovers, then he or she is not infective anymore. That is to be noticed also. What also happens is that once the person has recovered, he or she will have immunity from the disease. Up to now, the research is showing for at least 10 years.
Okay, and public transport, Dr. Ferguson?
For public transport, the recommendation is at this point making sure that airplanes are really screened. That is the main advice that WHO is giving at this point in time. Once it reaches a country, of course, that's a different issue because there's local transmission, but we are not in that stage.
All right, here's a question from Ricky Pasco, the immediate past president of the Jamaica Network of Seropositives, expressing concern about those Jamaicans living with HIV/AIDS, given the fact that their immune system is already compromised. What do we tell persons, he asked, living with HIV/AIDS so as not to create a panic, but at the same time, obviously, allow them to care properly for themselves?
Yeah.
Yes, Ebola.
Yeah, what happens is that when a person contracts Ebola, the concurrent infection has to be treated. The treatment for Ebola is supportive treatment. Mainly the patients will die because of, let's say, dehydration. So rehydration has to be done through IV fluids or oral rehydration. Then supportive treatment, if there is a need with oxygen therapy or maintaining the blood pressure, has to be done. But at the same time, any concomitant infection has to be treated. As usual, because it's a very virulent disease, any type of infection that a person will already have, he or she is more at a risk, but the treatment has to be continued.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm losing track, but perhaps let's go back to this side.
Thank you very much. My name is Fayval Williams, and I'm the JLP representative for St. Andrew Eastern. This is a question for Minister Ferguson. Recently, the government announced the National Chest Hospital as one of the Ebola centers. That location is in the midst of densely populated communities. Some of those are vulnerable communities. Can you help us to understand what led to this decision, and if there were other less densely populated areas that were considered? Also, yesterday on Nationwide, George Davis talked about a location called Plum Point near the airport that could possibly be an appropriate location. Was this considered, and if not, why not?
Let me just say that National Chest for over 50 years have been used for this purpose. It is not new. There have never been, and I have not seen, I'm still researching, that as a result of the location, we have had citizens from communities being infected by virtue of the location of National Chest. We have had malaria, we have had TB, airborne diseases, and we have not, it still remains the best possibility from my advice from my technical team. So it is not a place that we can say this is an experiment, this is the first time. You know that that hospital, the nature of the work for a long time. And as I said, we have had special types of malaria that is extremely virulent, and we have been able to manage them at that same institution. And we'll be following the protocol as set out by the international agency and our own technical staff with many years of experience.
Let me just pose a question to Dennis Chong based on the presentation you gave, Mr. Chong, in terms of the economic impact of these illnesses. How best should our policymakers use that kind of information as they move forward with the preparedness?
As I was saying, Dion, I think the best thing to do is understand what the potential impact is. As I said, it can impact significantly upwards of 3% of GDP if not managed properly. But the best thing to do is, just not get there and manage the effectiveness of the border control. I think that's the most important thing. So everything that's being done in terms of the travel bans and the quarantines, and also to ensure, as I said, that there are the best resources at the ports for border control is really the way to go for us.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. Ishmida Wolf from Swim Jamaica and the Swimming Association of Jamaica, speaking on behalf of lifeguards who are mandated by their license to assist persons who are in difficulty, offer first aid. Let's say, for instance, a person who may be infected and may fall in difficulty while using our pools or beaches. What kind of protocols are in place for us in regards to offering that first aid? That's one. For those who don't know, lifeguards are mandated to offer that, and if someone dies because we fail to...
Understood, sir.
Right.
Next.
No, next one, a number of questions, 2 questions I've heard being asked and not been answered. The virus itself, how long does it live outside of the body? Say, for instance, if someone is infected and they vomit, how long is that virus alive in that vomit?
Okay, gonna stop you there though. Okay, so those 2 questions in terms of lifeguards. Dr. Ferguson?
The lifeguard one?
Listen. What I would say, I'm not the expert, but don't give mouth to mouth.
No, I mean, from a serious perspective, Ebola is a dangerous and devastating disease. As we said earlier, in the instance where you are in the incubation period, even if you are infected, it means that you are not infectious. Once you become infectious, in terms of signs and symptoms, swimming is not the first thing on your mind. I can tell you that. Would not be the first thing on your mind.
At the National Stadium, let me say, with respect, quickly, no,
hold on. I have 3 minutes left before I wrap. You did ask your second question.
No, but it's not answered, ma'am. Please, with respect, what I'm saying, we had a case with, like, for instance, the Chick V. The person was sick and he came to the stadium to swim because he just thought, first of all, oh, it was just the old bones kicking in. I'm saying it could be the same. Someone is having certain kind of symptoms and they want to swim off a situation. That's one. And the other question that I asked, I would really love an answer for that. Please, the questions that have been asked, I didn't get an answer. I have a person, a family member who is critical, and I'm supposed to give blood. There, I was told 4 weeks after Chick V infection, it's safe, and I was told on Monday, no, it's not 4, it's 8 weeks. I'm not sure what is there. The person is critical, and I need to give blood. So,
thank you so much.
3 questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, hold on, please. We don't need to shout. Let's just let Dr. Cook comment there.
As far as giving blood after Chick V, for the safety of everyone, we have said it is 8 weeks, and that is what has been maintained by the blood bank. As far as the lifespan of Ebola outside of the body, I am not sure if Mr. Fang would like to answer that. How long does it live outside of the body?
What we recommend is if a person with Ebola has used any utensils to just destroy it. The reason is not to touch it. The virus will, listen, it's very important. It's very important. The virus will stay in the bedding or any utensils being used by the person. So the rule is it will survive there for anywhere from 48 to 72 hours. But still, you don't even want to go there. You just want to destroy it. One thing, because of the time factor I didn't mention, was the reason a specific topic was put on cage management on safe burials is because it's not practiced here, but in some parts of the world, the practice being done in funerals and burials can be a source of transmission. So the advice is, unlike the traditional practice of waiting for some time to show respect to those that died, to bury immediately. So these are very important points.
And if I could just say as well, sir, I don't want you to think that your concern about the necessary function that lifeguards play is being made fun of, but I would think, and the doctors have a whole set of doctors who can correct me if I'm wrong, I would think if somebody is ill in a way that they are throwing up or exuding other kinds of body fluids, I would think the best thing would be, doctor, correct me if I'm wrong, get them to accident and emergency as soon as possible. Correct? I'm correct. I know we have more questions, but I am going to have to wrap it up there. I want to ask you to give a round of applause to all the presenters. We've been listening to the Health Minister, Dr. Fenton Ferguson. We've also had with us Dennis Chung of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Dr. Cam Mung of the Pan American Health Organization. We're not forgetting at all Dr. James Hospedales, head of the Caribbean Public Health Agency. I know he wasn't engaged during the Q&A, but I think his presentation made a huge impact on our audience. I want to especially single out and to commend for your applause as well, Keneal Thomas from the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, who has been signing, and I just want you to bear in mind that what he's been doing essentially is talking with his hands for 3 hours straight. That, I think, deserves a round of applause. Thank you, of course, to the Medical Association of Jamaica and all their partners for putting this on. Thank you all so very much for coming, and to all the media partners, the Gleaner, the RGR Group, for transmitting this and carrying it live to the audiences. Thank you all so much for coming, and safe journey home.
Has just presented live coverage of the Medical Association of Jamaica's public forum on the chikungunya virus and Ebola, the impact on Jamaica's health and economy. JNN, news worth watching.